Hello, I'm Gareth. This is Somewhere on Earth, and it's Tuesday, the 21st of November, 2023. Let's give you some metadata here, some geolocation indeed. We are in London with guests from Cameroon, Washington, California, and Brazil. With us today is Brazil-based technology journalist Angelica Mari, all the way from Sao Paulo. So, Angelica, in fact, you join us on, I think it's the third leg of your world tour, because you've just been travelling a lot recently. So here you are. Just so you know, you're in London now, in case you've lost track of where on earth you are.
Thank you.
And you've just been to the Wired conference, haven't you?
Yes. It's been a whirlwind. So I spent a few days at Web Summit in Lisbon. I went to Dublin to fetch my master's diploma in cyber psychology.
Of which, congratulations.
Yay! And now I'm here with you to discuss the Wired conference, Wired's impact event that happened this morning.
So what did you make of it then? What was the general feeling and mood over there?
It was really interesting. There was a lot of talk about the major environmental threats the society is up against. So air pollution, extreme heat, and others, and how tech might be used to tackle those challenges.
And were there any glaring omissions, maybe, from the programme? Or did you feel it was pretty balanced, that you felt you came away and thought, yeah, they've pretty much nailed it here. Whoever programmed the whole agenda for the conference did it okay? Yeah,
I think there was a bit of holding politicians to account. For example, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was on stage.
Oh, yeah.
And air pollution is a big theme for him. And he was talking about how London might have acceptable levels of air pollution by 2030 that compares to the UK government's ambitions to get it to that level, acceptable levels by 2040. So that was quite a strong statement.
Yeah, sure thing. And meanwhile, of course, you've got all the shenanigans going on at OpenAI. So who knows, perhaps they'll have a new CEO by the time you hear this. I'm just looking at what the latest news is as we record this podcast on Tuesday, the 21st of November. And staff at OpenAI have called on the board of the company to resign after that, of course, shock dismissal over the weekend, or on Friday, I think it was, of Sam Altman. And I think there's a lot of people betting that he's going to be back at some point.
You sort of wonder whether it is a thriller or a farce, really.
You can't help wondering, yes, whether you have to sort of hide behind the sofa and just...
I know. Was it all orchestrated anyway? You wonder.
Let's plant that little seed. Okay, while we speculate on that, let's crack on with the podcast. And coming up today... a high-profile resignation, rows over Israel and Gaza, and much more. Yes, it was an eventful few days at the recent Web Summit. Angelica was there, as she was just saying. So was there space at the meeting to discuss any, actually web-related tech, given all the gossip that's been going on leading up to that event? Also today, the app that's been helping health workers in Cameroon give women better contraceptive advice. So what is the app, and what plans do its developers have to make it even more effective? It's all right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. Righty-ho then. Angelica, very much enjoying our groovy theme tune, I noticed there as well. That was nice. And
I love it.
It's pretty good, isn't it? It's quite an earworm. The first few weeks we started doing this, I still had it in my mind.
For me to arrive here in London, all the way from Brazil, to do my little maraca dance.
Just wanted to see you boogie, absolutely. In between all your boogieing and partying then, what about this Web Summit? Of course, a lot of controversy right there at the beginning, as mentioned there in the menu. In fact, let's just do the controversy bit first, and then you can tell me a little bit about, kind of what the summit is. But it hit the headlines for not all the right reasons, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So Paddy Cosgrove, the former Web Summit CEO, he faced a major backlash over a tweet in which he failed to explicitly condemn the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel when commenting on the Israeli military action in Gaza. So that led to the Israel ambassador in Portugal calling for a Web Summit boycott, and major tech firms like Google and Apple also withdrawing sponsorship. So finally, he stepped down from his role, and he was replaced by Catherine Mayer, who was the former CEO and executive director at Wikimedia Foundation.
Okay, so which meant for the time being, the summit could go on and get back to its, I guess, normal business. But for people who don't know then, the Web Summit, just set the scene for us, because it's pretty big and pretty influential, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So over 70,000 people attended this year, so it's a pretty big event. And let's face it, in summary, one of the main purposes of this event is generate business. So between startups, investors, and all that. But it's also an event that sparks conversations on topics that are related to technology that will affect all of us. So they tend to also attract lots of heads of state and authorities, even though this year has been particularly complicated for Web Summit because the Portuguese Prime Minister resigned over a corruption scandal. And also
so
the German finance minister planned to attend and cancelled his participation over Cosgrove's remarks on Twitter. So a lot to deal with, Gareth.
Sure.
But
there was time left over to talk about other stuff then.
Yes.
Yeah. Importantly, I bet AI came up then.
Yeah,
as it does.
As it does,
to
the surprise of a total number of 0 people. So yes, it was the main topic of conversation. And comparing to Web Summit Rio, which I attended back in May, the conversation seems to have moved on. In May, the topic was AI as well, but the mood was very much around experimentation, what can we do with ChatGPT and Midjourney and all that. And the conversations had this sort of alarmist tone. Even Cassie Korzikov, one of the chief scientists at Google, she came up with a panel that sort of, it was kind of like, come here to find out whether your job will get replaced by AI. And when it came to the presentation itself, she there was no such list. She was just telling people how she enhanced her presentation with AI. So really, how can you use AI as a co-pilot?
Yeah, that was quite a clever strategy, wasn't it? Because the joke could have been that they just had an AI to run the whole panel. You know, they could have had a chatbot do it. I'm sure it's happened in many other conferences. It's probably just becoming a bit of a cliche. But certainly this idea of like, no, okay, the AI is here, but as a co-pilot to get us through this panel.
Exactly.
Which is kind of that nuance where the conversation should be.
And she was saying, like, I had to use my coding skills. So I use a little bit of Python and a little bit of Midjourney, a little bit of ChatGPT, and voila, here's my beautiful presentation. So this year, the conversation has been very much around how we might regulate AI, case studies, and all that.
So, okay, shock horror news then. They haven't replaced all the panel moderators with robots quite yet, which was good news for you.
No, or podcasters for that matter.
Well, same difference. Discuss. But it did mean they had you involved in, you did 4 panels, didn't you?
Yes, I did 4 panels. It was busy. So
not simultaneously. Are you a chatbot?
No, I don't have my own avatar based on AI, whatever.
Yes. Okay. So, Pat, we don't have time to talk about all your panels, but is there one that you want to pick out and just tell us a bit about, maybe?
There were 2 that I quite enjoyed. So there was one on innovation versus regulation, so how you might strike the balance. So we had the Vice Prime Minister of Georgia and the co-founder of Glovo, which is a food delivery app. So we were discussing that. And Georgia is very much deregulating everything, and Glovo is a company that operates in that space. Oh. So they were talking. It was very much a conversation around the upsides of deregulation.
We'll be back after a quick break. Learn how luxury, social conditioning and psychology influence our behaviour every Friday on the Luxury Mind podcast. Unravel myths and explore unseen influences with a healthy dose of humour. Join the Luxury Mind podcast on YouTube and on all major podcast platforms.
Yeah, sure. And one of the upsides being that neither of your star panellists had just resigned just before the meeting, so that luckily they turned up to actually take part.
Yeah.
Then you also you did another one on generative AI, didn't you?
Yeah, generative AI
guess what? Marketing and advertising.
In marketing and advertising. And it was absolutely rammed. It was totally packed with people, Gareth. It was only standing room in that panel, full of marketers wondering how I might use ChatGPT to stop doing overtime at the office and ordering really bad pizzas.
Okay, that's what they care about.
Yeah.
But it's great to play to a full house, though. I mean,
yeah, it was a full house.
Kind of moderator and for the panellists as well. That obviously what you were discussing really landed.
Yes. So I think the main highlights of that panel was that it's still a few they're not case studies as such, but advanced experiments of generative AI, both on the efficiency side and the profit generation side. And there was also a bit of existential conversation, as it were, like, will ChatGPT steal our creativity or authenticity? And the answer was no, that there's still room for creativity and the human side will prevail.
Right. So those marketeers don't have to go back to their agencies and sack all the creatives quite yet. With the
not just yet.
Heartwarming resolution from that panel. Okay. Well, that was very good. In fact, just before we do leave it on that, was anything missing? And I wondered that about the Wired event, and you were kind of saying, no, it was pretty rounded, it was all there. But what about the Web Summit then?
I think what was missing, the big techs. The big techs were missing because they all withdrew sponsorship. And I think that illustrates the fact that they are very aware of their public image, and they're very quick to distance themselves from controversy, especially when it involves geopolitical tensions. So I'll put my media training hat on and also say that this shows how thoughtful and responsible communications has to be when you are in a high-profile position. So the leaders there won't do it again, probably. But apart from that, in terms of content, I think there was some interesting conversations around the future of tech in media. Also longevity, mobility, but I like to see more conversations around climate change. Like we were discussing about the Wired Impact event earlier. I think we have a lot of very serious issues to deal with. And sure, like the Greenpeace CTO, Priscilla Chomba said, it's all good to talk about AI, but we need to have a planet saved first.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to see more conversations around that. Okay.
Angelica, thank you. Fascinating to hear about your travels and your various conferences, and you still have energy to be here with us as well, which is great. And just to remind people that you're a tech journalist, you're based in Sao Paulo, just because I know we're still quite a new podcast, people still getting used to who we all are. So, folks, that's who Angelica is, but everyone knows who she is anyway. All right, subject change now. Let's talk about an app that's been trialled in Cameroon for helping women with contraception in regions where women are, in general, less aware of their options. It's a great example of bringing technology together with clinicians' experience and a bit of economics to improve people's lives. We'll talk about the app itself in just a moment. But first, here is producer Anya, who's popped over to this side of the glass to take us through this a little bit. And, of course, Anya, you've you've worn many hats in your journalistic career, not least of all being a BBC World Service health reporter. You've travelled all around the world looking at issues like this. So what do we need to know then, just to kind of get a setup for this story and about contraception and options available to women?
Well, I think, first of all, Gareth, I don't know if you know, but nearly half of all pregnancies are actually considered unwanted or mistimed. So they're just simply unplanned. Often these can occur soon after birth, a time when parents least need another pregnancy, when they're exhausted with a very young baby. We also know that delaying or spacing children, as it's called, leads to much better outcomes, so for mothers and for children. So women can return to the workplace. So you've got economic growth there. That's really important. Healthier babies, because those born in quick succession often have lower birth rates, and they can be born prematurely. So then you've got added amounts of stress and anxiety to parents and children, as well as impacting the children's health, and also obviously governments then having to spend more money because the children can be sicker. So there is this huge push by governments and NGOs to increase the use of contraception, but this isn't that simple. So here in the UK, Gareth, contraception is free. But in many low and middle income countries, women have to pay for it themselves. So when you're choosing a contraceptive method, you want to make sure that it's one that's going to work for you, that you're not likely to have side effects from, etc., etc. So according to surveys, about a quarter of women and teenage girls who don't want to fall pregnant don't use any method of contraception at all in low and middle income countries, which is, I see your face. You're like, really?
Yeah. Wow, really? Yeah.
Yeah. One method that they do use, which is free, is called LAM, the lactational amenorrhea method, which is, I'm sure, something you haven't heard of.
I completely don't have a Scooby-Doo about that. I'm sorry genuinely for my ignorance here, but you might have to take me through that.
Well, the body is a wonderful thing. And so breastfeeding. When a woman is breastfeeding, then she doesn't tend to ovulate. Now, people think, oh, this is amazing. I'm breastfeeding. This is great. I'm not going to fall pregnant. Not that simple. You have to feed every 4 hours. During the night, it's a minimum of every 6. Now, every child is different. Every child feeds differently. Some are much easier to breastfeed. Some are much harder to breastfeed. And this just isn't possible. And also, let's be honest, if you are absolutely exhausted with a new baby and you sleep for longer, well, that's what you do. Your body's just not going to wake up. So the problem with this method is that it's not very reliable, because you're not going to get your period until you ovulate, and therefore you might already be pregnant. You don't even know if you started to ovulate. So that's why there is, again, this big push for contraception. Many reasons for this lack of use of contraceptives amongst women. The cost that I've mentioned, supply issues, lack of trained staff to give advice or even fit some of these contraceptive devices, because you need qualified nurses and doctors to do that. And sorry to say, but opposition from male partners, that male partners don't want women using contraception. Now, increasing access to contraception by tackling some of these barriers can contribute to reductions in maternal mortality. Now, look at the numbers. Just listen to this. Sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 38 15-year-old girls will eventually die from a maternal cause, right? The most dangerous time in a woman's life is pregnancy, is labour, and the first 24 hours after that. And that is pretty much anywhere in the world. I've reported on this so many times, and women need access to good healthcare throughout this, and then also the chance to space out these children. So this is where the technology comes in. Nurses in a family clinic in Yaoundé in Cameroon were given a tablet. They asked their clients a set of questions. Then an algorithm was used to give the women the most appropriate choice of contraceptive.
Right. So perhaps we could talk through some of the choices those women might have been offered then. So what kind of contraceptive options are there?
Well, there's no one size fits all, because that would obviously be too easy. This study was looking specifically at something called LARCs, and these are long-acting reversible contraceptives, things like the coil or the implant, as well as the pill. So a woman can be fitted with a coil that's inserted into the uterus, and that can be in place for years. Some even can wear it for 5-10 years. So put it there, forget about it, as long as you don't have side effects. It doesn't suit everybody. Implants work for months, as do injections. Pill can be started and stopped quite easily. Now, women have to pick something that suits their lifestyle. So if you have a young baby, taking the pill at the same time every day is not really that simple. But it also needs to be tailored to their health needs. So you can't give certain contraceptives, some of these LARCs, to women who, for instance, have high blood pressure or are at risk of blood clots. And these are quite serious concerns, actually. They're only concerns for these people who have these issues. So everybody else is okay. But if they do, that's an issue. The algorithm takes all this into account and means the nurse does not have to remember and check each option, therefore saving lots and lots of time.
Which brings us nicely onto the app. Thanks for that, Anya. And it's been encouraging women, this app, to make more informed choices about contraceptives after birth. And as we just heard there are so many different options. The app has recently been trialled in a women and children's hospital in Cameroon, and it helps the health workers there nail down a key finding that a woman's choice of contraceptive depends on the information they receive, and it depends on cost. And Anya there was talking a bit about cost, certainly, as well. Now, there's nothing particularly high-tech about this app. It's basically a survey that runs on a tablet. And in a counselling session, then a health worker sits down with the woman to go through some questions and to outline the various contraception options. Researchers trialled the approach in a study involving nearly 800 women at that hospital that Anya mentioned in Yaoundé in Cameroon. And they found that the app improved the uptake of LARCs threefold. And quick reminder that LARC stands for longer-acting reversible contraceptives. Berk Ozler from the World Bank in Washington is one of the study authors, and he says one of the app's main benefits is that it gives the women a ranked recommendation of birth control methods.
Provision of this personalized ranked recommendations compared with the status quo world where everything is completely up to the client and the provider stays extremely agnostic about any methods, pros or cons, it increases the take-up of LARCs a lot. Like a typical client that walks into our hospital in Yaoundé, Cameroon, at full prices, they'll take up, only 1 in 10 will adopt a method and walk out of the hospital with it, adopt a long-acting method. The approach we have with the rank recommendations almost triples that. Now, you could worry that, well, you're increasing take-up, but maybe women aren't so happy about it. We also have data about that. The quality of care seems to be very high, which is not surprising to us because we know all these nurses, they're extremely well-trained and experienced. But also the client satisfaction is very high, in the order of 90-95%. They all say they would like to come back to this hospital again to get family planning services, etc. And in that sense, the take-up is higher, but there's no trade-offs with respect to client satisfaction. That's a nice attribute. So that's findings on the client side. On the nurses' side, it's probably better to hear directly from the nurses themselves. But I'll say a couple things. One is that these nurses were actually involved in the design phase of this app. Initially, they were a little bit even resistant. They were kind of rolling their eyes and saying, hey, how can you have like our job now, like be done with this thing? But then soon enough, they started seeing the kind of like the huge benefits from it. And then they kept saying, okay, what about we insert this question here? And how about if it works a little bit differently there, etc. So they, as well as, OBGYNs at the hospital and other experts were all involved in the design of this thing. And then second, our view from the trial is that they got used to following the app's kind of structure with respect to a typical counseling session. So they're asking the clients a lot of questions in a particular wording, in a particular way, and in a particular order. And they've now gotten really used to listening to all of that and then digesting it and then kind of acting on it. And so now they're telling us that even when they're not using the tablet necessarily, they kind of do it the same way. So it's actually trained them in a very particular kind of way that was designed for them. So there's much more streamlining and much more consistency across counseling sessions that happen in this hospital now because they've all been using this app.
Berk Ozler of the World Bank. So the nurses seem to adapt well to the app, as we heard there, albeit after being a little bit sceptical at first. Well, let's now hear the voices of some of those health workers.
Oui, par rapport à l'application, l'utilisation des tablettes.
The app and the use of the tablets didn't simplify my work. It rather perfected it because the survey was clearly mapped out and gave me a framework. This really helped me with planning the sessions and helping patients. I no longer use the tablet as the project is finished. Well, I really miss it because I really liked the project. I worked a lot with it. A resident came back, asked why we no longer used the tablet, and I had to tell them that it was for the project that only lasted 2.5 years. So I really liked it. I liked it a lot. It was very good.
Vraiment, l'expérience avec les tablettes était très enrichissante pour nous.
The experience with tablets was very enriching for us. At the hospital, the family planning consultation was private. The patients would pull out the phone and ask me questions. Really, it's made family planning that much more important to women, and that made them open up even more, because with all the questions the tablet was asking and all that. So it really made them feel that something was being done and that they had to get involved. I even bragged a bit about having this kind of application in my department. I felt very comfortable with it, and I really liked talking about it to people around me. Since I've really started working with the family planning, it's become a passion for me, so I realised that I talk about it all the time. At the moment when we do counselling, it's not as fast as with the tablet. I really enjoyed the experience with the tablet. It was very good.
Je suis Madame Hildegard Elombre. Je suis la major du
I am Mrs. Hildegard Elombre, a family planning lead at the Gynecological, Obstetrical and Paediatric Hospital of Yaoundé. I was delighted to work with the World Bank team for this family planning project. It was truly a unique and enriching experience for me. I must say that I miss it a lot.
Now, also working on that trial was Susan Athey of Stanford University, and she says the next stages might be to develop the app further and to bring in, guess what, AI, to make it more like a digital assistant, possibly for women to use themselves at home.
AI can be used to help other humans better. So one of the things is that, in general, if you're giving advice to someone or you're counseling someone, or you're teaching them, it's important for the person doing the teaching or doing the counseling to have all of the relevant information. Because it's difficult for any human to have all of that information perfectly memorized and at the tip of their fingers. But then, in addition, what's extremely difficult for a human to do is to understand, as a function of all of the individual characteristics, what is the best information and the most useful information for that person, because there's lots of combinations of people. And so getting that match right between the person's circumstance and the information you have is super challenging. So if you have some sort of digital assistant that can help the human help the other human, you can not just get accurate information and comprehensive information, but you can narrow that down to get the right information to that human. And so the app can really help curate the information and get you just the information you need. And I think this is an example of something that has much broader applicability. It may be one of the biggest surface areas for widespread applicability of recently developed digital technologies. So this was just a great fit for our lab.
How shareable is this tech? Once because this has been part of a study then that you've recently published in Science Advances, but presumably other clinics, other practitioners might want to get in on this. Is this a shareable thing?
Absolutely. And I think this is, again, one of the reasons that this is so exciting as a case study or a demonstration project, because we were able to design this app ourselves, on a shoestring budget. This is something that pretty much anybody could design with minimal technical expertise. We used a survey software on a standard tablet. So this, in principle, we can share the content of this, and anybody could use it and set up their own app. There are lots of low-code, no-code software platforms that this could be implemented on. So essentially, this is almost zero fixed cost and almost zero marginal cost in terms of the development. Of course, so the real cost of implementing something like this would be just getting the physical hardware to run it on, and also the training and kind of getting it integrated with a hospital system. But the marginal cost of the intervention itself is just minimal. And in addition to the way that we've designed it to be implemented as a nurse assistant tool, if that training budget or just the change in the workflow was for some reason too difficult for a hospital or even an outpatient clinic to kind of implement, you could use this in other ways. So it could be a waiting room app. It could be on a website, and women could do it for themselves and just look at the results before they came in, or even in order to decide whether to come in. So this is extremely easy tech to use, and especially given the privacy considerations around contraception, there could be a very big good use case for just letting people do this in the privacy of their own homes, and if they're nervous about coming in, or if it's difficult for them to come in. So I think we've generally been thinking that, once we've established the effectiveness of this, it would be really nice to see this developed into an app that people could download from the App Store, and then you could have more features. You could embed videos or photo. In some future world, you could add in some, ChatGPT queries into a curated database, although that piece would require more testing. So that is not zero cost. But the rest of it could be very easy. And so, it'd be really exciting if someone who was interested in user interface design and was interested in making this, in distributing this, wanted to pick it up. And that's something that, we're very curious about, but we haven't started that process ourselves.
So that's Susan Athey there of Stanford. So Angelica Mari, listening to both of those clips, and of course the clip of the nurses themselves, what do you make of what you've heard there? Because it seems to me quite a kind of delightfully low tech for me, in a way, a survey on a tablet.
I know, but what might seem like low tech solutions for some of us will be totally groundbreaking and really important for some other people, like we see in this family planning app. And what really matters here is how it delivers information to people. And what we see in issues that society is up against, like the rise in teenage pregnancies, what we find is that it happens because of lack of information.
Yeah, sure. Now, what about the situation in Brazil? Because quite a high teenage pregnancy rate, isn't there, in Brazil?
Yes. 1 in 7 babies in Brazil is the child of a teenage mother, and that number is rising. So disinformation about sexuality and reproductive rights are the main reasons for that rise in teenage pregnancies. And these apps can really be useful for that, for delivering information. And not only that, they can serve as tools for gathering data on family planning needs and trends in different regions. That's particularly helpful in countries that have a continental size like Brazil, and very different realities depending on where you go. So that data can be very important also for government and non-governmental organizations to tailor their health programs and policies as well.
All right. Well, there we will leave it. Angelica Mari, thank you very much. I say very
pleasure.
Flattered that you fitted us in on your whirlwind tour of everywhere. So that was Angelica Mari you just heard there. Just before we go, the usual reminders that we love hearing from you. So do stay in touch, won't you? Our email is hello@somewhereonearth.co. On WhatsApp, we are code 44 7486 329 484. And then on Twitter and Facebook, just search for Soap Tech, but don't spell it like soap with an A, otherwise you'll just find out a lot about tech related to how to keep yourself clean. So it's SOEP, of course it stands for the Somewhere on Earth podcast. So that's Soap Tech. That will take you to where we are on social media, including LinkedIn. We're over there now as well, and we do really want to hear from you, so you're bound to have things to say about what you just heard there about pregnancies and contraceptives, what you make of this idea of just bringing more information and ranking information to women who've already had a baby and now want to employ some kind of birth control. What do you make of that? And of course, that long chit chat we had about the Web Summit. So when do you think it will be that an AI is going to just get rid of all the hosts and moderators at somewhere like the Web Summit. Not too soon, we hope, but if you want to provoke us or upset us by saying the sooner the better, then feel free to be a bit controversial and it'll get read out. So there you go. That is it, other than to thank our lovely team here with audio production from Keziah Wenham Kenyon and John Cronin at Lanson's Team Farner. Our production manager is Liz Tui, the editor is Angelica Mari, and I'm some bloke called Gareth. See you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.